Welcome to State of the State, the monthly roundup of policy and research for the state of Michigan, brought to you by the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University, Russ White, and our friends here at MSU Radio Studios. I'm Arnold Weinfeld, Associate Director for the Institute. Joining me are my co-hosts, Institute Director Dr. Mac Grossman and economist Dr. Charlie Ballard. Our guest today will be former Michigan Congressman, Governor, and U.S. Ambassador James Blanchard as we discuss trade relations with Canada amidst the president's decree regarding tariffs. So, Matt and Charlie, President Trump has been in office about 10 days, and for many, it seems like half a year already. Lots going on, lots of executive orders, lots of decrees. Matt, why don't we start with you to discuss some of the politics of it all regarding the executive orders? What's your take on these executive orders? How many of them are truly going to be impactful?
President Trump certainly came in this term a lot more prepared to act quickly across all of his objectives with a lot of pre-planning. That resulted in a whole lot more executive orders signed in the first 2 days than in the first term, and some evidence that they were more ready to stand up to court scrutiny. But research on the first term's executive orders concluded that he really didn't achieve any increase in the number of executive orders that actually led to policy change. He had a large number of executive actions, but it was an increase in the executive actions that were purely ceremonial and did not actually result in policy change. So it'll be interesting to see if this term we see the same results. Now, the second week of the Trump administration brought a little bit more chaos, especially with the memo from the Office of Management and Budget that essentially froze all federal grant programs and was quickly overturned by the courts and then rescinded. That one did not show a lot of pre-thought and was quickly discarded.
Of the executive orders that he has put forth, which ones do you see as truly being the most impactful? For instance, the executive orders on diversity, equity, inclusion. I know have even people on our campus not just worried but impacted already by some of the federal how some of the federal agencies have reacted as well.
Yes, there is going to be broad impact. There have already been people let go in federal government offices. That is the type of executive order that can have a bigger impact because it directly controls the federal workforce and bureaucracy, and it overturns some actions that President Biden took also via executive action. So those are the kind that tend to have more action, more results. But you also have a lot of people just anticipating potential impacts and kind of trying to comply in advance, and that makes the reach of the executive orders initially much broader.
And what are we seeing in terms of reaction across the country? Is this what the American public that voted for President Trump? Are they cheering all this on? Is this what they expected right out of the gate?
The early polling showed about a four of the 25 that they polled on had majority support. So most of these are pretty unpopular. Among the least popular was actually renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. I was sort of surprised that that one was at the bottom of the list. But no, most of them are not very popular, but they do carry out campaign promises that were litigated in the campaign for the most part.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and Charlie, there doesn't seem to have been much economic impact from all this. The big announcement this week was that the Fed was holding steady on interest rates. The markets were quite shook by DeepSeek AI out of China. That seemed to really shake things up. What do you make of this on the economic side?
Well, Donald Trump had the good fortune 8 years ago to inherit an economy that was in pretty good shape. And then this has happened again for him. The American economy has recovered, as I've said in our program, remarkably well from the COVID recession. And Joe Biden is, I believe, the only president who had employment growth during every month of his presidency. Employment is continuing to grow, but inflation way down from where it was in the middle of 2022, but it's still a little higher than the Federal Reserve would like. It's below 3%. They'd like it to be below 2%. And because of that, the Fed has hit the pause button, at least for the moment. They were earlier forecast that they would drop interest rates 4 times this year. Nobody thinks that's going to happen anymore. Maybe 2 more decreases in interest rates. They're taking a very slow wait and see approach. One interesting effect of the change of administration is the organizations that take the pulse of the public. Consumer confidence hasn't changed enormously, but there are lots of Democrats who thought that the economy was great 2 months ago who now think the economy is terrible, and lots of Republicans who thought the economy was terrible 2 months ago and now think it's great. In fact, it really hasn't changed that much, at least not yet, although if I think we're going to talk about tariffs a little bit later on here, if we get tariffs of the magnitude that have sometimes been talked about, that would have some really major disruptive effects.
Well, you talked about the economy. Let's talk a bit about the Michigan Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference that took place about 2 weeks ago. This is where the administration, through the Department of Treasury, the House and Senate fiscal agencies, get together with a bunch of economists and try and figure out how good Michigan's economy is and how much revenues we're going to be. And lo and behold, we're still roaring through budget surpluses. And so it's interesting your comments about who believes what in terms of how the economy is doing. And because despite the budget surpluses, there still do seem to be a good percentage of Michiganders and Americans who feel as if the economy is just not working for them.
Well, there's 2 things that I want to distinguish. One is kind of the current macroeconomic situation. Macroeconomic unemployment is not very high. Employment continues to grow. Inflation has moderated. But then there's the very long-term thing that really worries me, which is that over the last, it's almost 50 years now, most of the benefits of the growth of the American economy, and this is true in Michigan and just about everywhere else, most of those benefits have accrued to those who are either at the very top, the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs, or those who are quite affluent, if not as affluent as the tech billionaires. It's been a very unbalanced economic growth that we've had since the 70s, quite in contrast to the economic growth that we had in the middle of the 20th century, where the economy grew rapidly. The rich did get richer, but the poor got richer and the middle class got richer. That hasn't happened nearly as much in the last 40 or 50 years, and that's one of the reasons I think for this widespread disaffection. There are a lot of middle and lower middle income working families who really have not done all that great.
Well, and to that point, I'm going to use this as a promo for IPSR's next Luncheon Public Policy Forum this coming Tuesday, where we'll hear about the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference, but we'll also have with us MSU faculty who have done some work on gauging the public's outlook towards the economy here in Michigan over the last 5 years. Some very interesting information. Matt, let's get back to Michigan politics for a second. Big announcement this week. Senator Gary Peters suddenly came out and said he was done. And so that naturally rose to the top of the news chain. What's your outlook there? It looks like a crowded Democratic field, and I get the feeling that Republicans are really rubbing their hands on this one.
We certainly will have an interesting election year in 2026. All the major state offices, all the legislatures, and both Senates are in the Senate seat and the governor's office. So we'll have quite a few open elections to contest, and people are already jumping in quite early. It is interesting to see, who wants to run in the Senate race rather than the governor's race, and vice versa on the two political sides. But this will be, near the top of the national races, probably in the top 4 or 5, and probably went up a notch from being an open seat. But you still expect in a a Republican presidential year, the natural vote tends to move about 5 points in the direction of Democrats. So you still have to say Democrats would be slightly favored in this Senate race.
And would that count even with the gubernatorial election up and Governor Whitmer being term limited? So we're going to have candidates for that too. How much will the race for a new governor impact the federal race or vice versa?
Governor's races historically have been more independent than the Senate race of the presidential race, but they're still affected by the national political environment because it also affects who turns out in these elections, and it should be a more Democratic electorate in a Republican presidential year. But obviously, it'll be closely competitive as well. And if we do end up getting an independent candidate until the end, then that changes that dynamic quite a bit compared to the Senate race.
Well, Charlie mentioned in his comments a few moments ago the issue of tariffs. And since we're on politics and the economy, this seems to be the right spot to introduce our guest, former Michigan Governor James Blanchard. Let me also mention the governor's continued connection to his alma mater, Michigan State, where he chairs the External Advisory Council of the Center for Canadian Studies and sponsors and conducts a policy forum each year through the College of Social Science, which provides the MSU community with the opportunity to see, hear, and learn from national and international leaders. And finally, also, he serves as partner in the global law firm DLA Piper. Governor Blanchard, welcome to the program. Certainly keeping very busy these days.
Well, thank you. Well, I followed politics my whole life. I started handing out leaflets for Adlai Stevenson when I was 10 years old. So I've been around. But
there might be a few folks on the listening that remember Adlai Stevenson. But let's talk for a minute about your role as ambassador to Canada. And the president has announced this morning that tariffs will go, 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican goods will go into effect starting tomorrow. Give us your perspective.
Well, it's really a crazy time, as you've talked about other issues as well. Canada is really our best partner in almost everything we do, from trade to United Nations to founders of NATO. They're our partner. And Michigan is the leading edge of that relationship with Canada and with Ontario. We are really the cradle of cooperation. So any kind of tariff on Canada is really, I think, misguided and foolish. I know that Mr. Trump wants the attention, but to suggest that Canada is a major provider of migrants or fentanyl is simply not true, period. Not true. So I think he's a disruptor. I don't think he's a very happy person. I won't go into everything, but the reality that he pardoned 1,600 people who assaulted our capital, many assaulting the police, gives them the imprimatur of being able to say you can attack a policeman, maybe even kill them, and get off away with it. It's tragic. That's the most tragic thing I think he's done. These tariffs will be counterproductive. We've got Charlie Ballard here on this, who is a leading economist. I mean, it'll be a tax on our people. The auto industry is not going to be able to live with a major tariff. We have a completely integrated manufacturing and auto company. Our energy industry is not going to be able to live with that at all. For example, one company, Enbridge, which I'm familiar with, not only has its famous Line 5, but it provides home heating for the city of Detroit in the form of natural gas. Are we going to raise those prices? It's going to be inflationary, foolish, counterproductive. I don't know what our leaders in the auto industry are going to do. Not only that, the parts and suppliers and others. Uh, it's just crazy. So the question is, what will happen with the details? Nobody really knows. All I know is he's childish and foolish and counterproductive. And I will tell you this: the people of Canada, the leaders in Canada, the business leaders, political leaders, others, academics, they know that Trump, in many respects, is really a buffoon and not serious. But their economy will pay a very, very steep price. And I will tell you, the average Canadian is totally disgusted with the way Mr. Trump has treated not only Trudeau, who clearly is not running again, but also the way he talks about the Canadian people as a problem. 51st state. That is the most insulting thing he can say. He knows it. He keeps repeating it. The most important thing for us in the world is to have allies everywhere, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and right next door. And frankly, our most trusted and valuable ally is Canada. And it's outrageous that he's even talking about these kind of tariffs. Briefly, they had steel tariffs during Mr. Trump's time. They finally exempted Canada. But the steel tariffs alone cost Ford Motor $500 million in the price of steel alone. So this is a serious thing. Everybody's going to be working to try to mollify him or amend what's going on. We'll just have to see what the details really are. But I can't think of anything that's more foolish and stupid and disrespectful of Canadians and our own consumers.
Charlie, this is not the first time in American history that tariffs might play a major role in our economy or with relations with other countries. I mean, there was a period of time correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly a period of time in the early part of the 20th century and late 19th century where tariffs played a big role in the American economy. Is that right?
Yeah, tariffs have been a subject of political and economic debate for a long time. There tended to be in the 19th century the Northeast, which was more oriented toward manufacturing, wanted high tariffs to protect from Britain. The South wanted low tariffs so that they could get imports. I should say that the tariffs that we had for a lot of our history, for the first maybe half of the American Republic, probably weren't that important to the overall economy because transportation costs were so much higher than they are now. We didn't have gigantic container ships that could carry vast amounts of stuff across oceans. And the American growth in the 19th century would have happened with or without tariffs because we had such a gigantic and rapidly growing internal market. By 1930, when we passed the highest tariffs in our nation's history, then those tariffs did make a difference, and our trading partners retaliated by imposing tariffs on us, and that didn't cause the Great Depression, but it didn't help it either. It probably exacerbated the Great Depression somewhat. My view of tariffs is they're kind of like alcoholic beverages. A little bit of tariffs, like a little bit of alcohol, probably not such a bad thing. A whole lot of tariffs will get you into big trouble. And the tariffs of the magnitude that President Trump has talked about would be very disruptive. One other thing that I think is important for listeners to know. President Trump has often said he has used he talks about how we have been taken advantage of. These other countries have ripped us off. And his evidence for that is that we have trade deficits with various countries. And he says the tariffs are going to solve it. So we did 8 years ago put tariffs on China. Our trade deficit with China didn't change. In fact, it went up slightly. I don't have time to go through the whole reasoning why tariffs really cannot be expected to fix that. It's more that we are just a big spending nation for 50 years. We've been swiping that credit card. And if you're going to spend a lot, you're going to have deficits with somebody. We don't have big deficits with Canada. And in fact, we have surpluses with lots of countries, and I don't think we're ripping them off. I think it's just the particular configurations of goods and services that we sell or buy. Um, I think you can tell I'm not really enthusiastic about tariffs, and I hope that cooler heads prevail. I also hope that the United States Congress, which I took another look at the U.S. Constitution recently, and I saw that there is this thing called the Congress, and they're supposed to have important an important role. So far they've been pretty supine regarding President Trump's power grabs, but I'm hoping that they'll get a little bit more of a spine.
Well,
Yeah,
when people can't find avocados for their Super Bowl guacamole, then that's when the Congress will start hearing from people.
Well, they start raising energy prices, utility prices, they're going to feel it. I mean, the reality is, Charlie, don't you think these tariffs are, if they're applied across the board, are going to be inflationary? And if there's one issue that Trump really benefited from, it was the concern over inflation.
Right.
It was immigration and inflation. I don't think it was anything else. And one of the problems we have is the control of Congress is with the Republicans, narrowly in the House, but in the Senate, where we're dealing with confirmations, the order of the day for Republican senators is, what do we need to do to please Donald Trump? We don't want to incur his wrath because his supporters will come after us. What do we do to keep him happy? Not is somebody qualified. You all know, and the senators know, he has nominated people who are not qualified for these cabinet positions, some of them outrageously unqualified. Now, what are these senators going to be doing in 6 months? How are they going to look at things? I think they're worried about the tariffs as well. Even the Republicans, they don't believe in tariffs, and their advisors don't either. So we'll see how it all plays out. But we're going to have, if he really levies a 25% tariff on Canada, for example, we're going to have a mess, and it'll be a political crisis. I think those are the kind of things Donald Trump likes. By the way, we're going to dedicate the new Gordie Howe International Bridge next fall, which takes our trade and our relationship, our cultural relationship, to a new level. It's really exciting. Most important infrastructure project in North America, or at least in the northern borders. We should be celebrating our relationship, not trying to put it asunder. It's really, really sad.
Charlie, I know you're our economist and not our financial advisor, but the markets don't seem to be reacting like they're going to be expecting a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico for the entirety of the Trump administration. And even as you said, Governor, you have these huge potential effects on the auto industry and every other industry between Michigan and Canada. They're not they're not making dramatic changes that make it look like they expect that either yet. So I'm just wondering, are people expecting that this is going to be a short-lived show that gets resolved quickly? Are they expecting just people come and are going to get exemptions because they go and grovel to Trump? Why aren't we seeing the big reactions that you would expect if we expect these big economic effects?
I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. The tariffs that were levied on China, for instance, 8 years ago, there were various ways to circumvent those. Apple Computer, their CEO, developed a personal relationship with Donald Trump and got it such that when he asked for iPhones manufactured in China to be exempted from the tariffs, he got that. Also, it was just on China. The biggest beneficiary was Vietnam because lots of Chinese components were assembled in Vietnam, or just Chinese goods were just re-exported through Vietnam. So there are workarounds. And I think people imagine that some of those will happen. I think there's probably also a kind of a wait and see. We have seen lots of things with Donald Trump where he made a big splash, but then kind of pulled back. Um, the stock market, a lot of people think it's whether we're on the verge of a correction, I'm not sure, but stock prices relative to earnings are quite high right now, with the exception perhaps of Nvidia. Arnold mentioned earlier the DeepSeek AI, the Chinese company that kind of ran circles around the American AI companies, and some of the American chip and AI companies did lose market share, market value in the stock market a few days ago. But overall, the stock market is pretty high, and I think a lot of people are just taking a wait and see attitude.
I think that, yeah, I think probably they figure a lot of this is bluster. He'll try to make an example of some commodities or something and then announce his base. He's done it. But the question is the diplomatic, and he doesn't care about it, but the diplomatic damage to our allies everywhere is really serious. And, and I will tell you that a lot of my political friends in Canada say their disappointment is not in Trump and the way he's acting. They've seen him before. It's the complacency of the Republicans in Congress and the American people, and including Democrats, who just seem to be accepting all this and not fighting back. My sense is this will turn out to be more bluster than reality, but we don't know. Charlie, you may recall when the Chinese retaliated on our agricultural products like soybeans, Trump ended up subsidizing them to offset the difference because they got hurt very, very seriously. And he couldn't let the rural areas blame him for this. So he subsidizes them the difference between what China, I guess, levied and what we normally would make. Is that correct, by the way?
Yep. Yes, that is. We did. We heavily subsidized farmers in this country during the last Trump administration for his tariffs on various agricultural products.
We've had a lot of subsidies on some agricultural products for a long time, and not just during that episode. The question of who pays the tariff, and President Trump has said the foreign countries will pay the tariff. Well, foreign companies will be adversely affected, but the evidence from past tariff episodes indicates that the biggest effect is going to be it's going to raise the price of things that American consumers buy. And that will add to the price level. And I mentioned the Federal Reserve earlier. That puts the Fed in a very tricky position because if that happens, and we're not sure that it will, there will be all of a sudden jump in prices. So there will be an inflationary pressure. And that makes their job of trying to maintain the economy on a growth path while moderating inflation, that makes their job a lot harder.
Well, I want to thank Governor Blanchard for being with us here today. Greatly appreciate your presence and perspective. Well, again, thank you, Governor Blanchard, Matt and Charlie. Always a pleasure to be with you. And always appreciate Russ White and the folks here at MSU Radio Studios for their support of this program. Join us again next month on State of the State.
And thank you for having me.